Welcome back to Mackey Tech, and one of the most common comments I get in my Ugreen videos is about security, especially when it comes to exposing the NAS to the internet. A lot of people have expressed concerns about Ugreen as a Chinese company, while others simply don't like the idea of any NAS being remotely accessible. So I figured this was a good opportunity to talk about some security best practices that apply to any NAS so you can make sure that you are secure. Speaking of which, we'll talk about enabling two-factor authentication, tweaking the NAS's built-in firewall, and disabling services you don't use, including Ugreen's remote access. Finally, we'll add Tailscale so you can still securely access your NAS from anywhere to access the services like Immich, which we discussed in our last video. And by the way, if you're new here and you like NAS and Hope Lab content, make sure to subscribe and feel free as always to leave me any constructive feedback in the comments. Now let's jump in. So we'll start by going to the Ugreen OS control panel and selecting security, and then selecting the security option on top. Now, most of these options are enabled by default, but I wanted to run through them real quickly so we know what's what. The first option allows you to set a time for when the NAS will kick you out of your session after being inactive. The second one, for quote-unquote login session, if it's enabled, will clear any active user logins whenever the NAS restarts. So you'll need to log back in if this is checked and the NAS restarts. The next section here protects against denial of service or DOS attacks, which is another computer intentionally flooding your NAS with basically so much network traffic that it can slow down or even become unavailable. TCP, UDP, and ICMP are all types of network traffic that are associated with DOS attacks, and enabling all three will allow your NAS to monitor, curb, or in any case block any suspicious traffic that could indicate a DOS attack. Next, we'll look at failed login attempts. This setting determines how many times someone can enter the wrong password from the same IP address within a certain amount of time before your NAS automatically blocks them. If you click on Block List, you can view and manage any IP addresses that have been blocked, and you can also manually add one if need be. The whitelist is optional, but it's one of those things that I'd like to have and not need versus needing and not have. It allows you to specify trusted IP addresses that should never automatically be blocked. For example, if you're always on the same computer or smartphone and you're just having one of those days where for the life of you, you just can't seem to remember your password, or you have fat fingers or whatever, the whitelist gives you a little extra insurance against accidentally locking yourself out, which, yes, I've done many times. That brings us to the last option of TLS. Now, this setting doesn't enable HTTPS. It just specifies which version of TLS the NAS will allow when someone connects your NAS over HTTPS. Leaving it set to TLS 1.2 or later helps prevent any older, less secure encryption protocols from being used as a safeguard. The next section is for maintaining account security, and to start, I would strongly recommend you enable two-factor authentication on your Ugreen if you haven't already, for that extra layer of security in addition to using a very strong password. The account activity window lets you see who's currently connected to your NAS, how they're connected, and from which device or IP address. If you notice anything unfamiliar or simply want to disconnect someone, you can terminate their session right from here. The last is account block, which is similar to the other block we just looked at, but it works at the account level instead of the IP level. Now let's look at the NAS's built-in firewall. Now, if you already have a dedicated firewall, that's going to be your main line of defense. This is just another layer of protection. So instead of asking things like, what should I be blocking? I would prefer you ask something along the lines of, what do I need to actually allow, or what do I actually use in terms of services? This is known as the default deny approach. So we'll start with a configuration name and click New Rules. The allow option we want is already selected, and so we'll start with selecting the NAS LAN ports that we need, and then we'll select the actual port numbers. and click the option to select the services we need to allow. For me, I use SSH, SMB, NFS, so we'll add those to our allow list. And if you don't use certain services like FTP or WebDAV, there's really no need to create a deny rule for them. Just don't enable them when you're under Ugreen's file services. You'll also notice there are options like geo IP blocking, and if you already have a typical ISP router, this can be another helpful layer by blocking connection attempts from countries you never expect legitimate traffic from. Just remember that it's not a replacement for the strong password, the multi-factor authentication, or the secure remote access. And if you're already running more advanced firewalls with, say, pfSense, OpenSense, or even Unify, those are actually much better equipped to handle things like geo-blocking and any VLAN access rules you want to add. As mentioned, the goal is to only allow the devices, networks, and services you actually use or need. That brings us to remote access, and the Ugreen NAS has a dedicated remote access called Ugreen Link that allows encrypted access to Ugreen from outside your network. Nothing wrong with that, but if you want something that's not governed by Ugreen and hopefully platform independent, that's where Tailscale comes in. I really like Tailscale because it uses WireGuard for end-to-end encryption and gives me a one-stop shop, if you will, or consistent way to securely access all of my services and devices remotely. So first, we'll disable the Ugreen remote access, and now let's go ahead and get Tailscale involved. First, let's make sure we have Docker installed on the Ugreen, which is via the App Store. Next, we'll go into the File Manager and select our shared folder, and then open the Docker folder. And under the Docker folder, we'll create a folder called Tailscale, and under the Tailscale folder, we'll create a folder called State. And you'll note that I'm creating these folders all in lowercase, and you'll see why later. Next, we'll go into the Docker app and select Project and select Create New. Next, we'll give it a name and then select Path, where we select the Tailscale folder we created under the Docker folder. Next, we need to get our YAML, so we'll click on the Import option on the right side and then select our Tailscale YAML and click on Import. And I will be leaving a link in the video description with the Tailscale YAML that we're using in my free Patreon. But before we get into the YAML too much, let's first go to tailscale.com in a browser and sign up for a free account if you haven't done so already. If you already have an account, just go ahead and log in. After signing up for an account, we'll install the Tailscale app on the device that we're using to connect to our NAS. In my case, I'm using the iPhone, so I go to my VPN section and set up Tailscale as a VPN. Next, we'll go back to tailscale.com and you should see your device under your Tailnet as connected. And your Tailnet is all of the devices that have Tailscale installed on your Tailscale account. To add our Ugreen NAS to our Tailnet, we'll click on Settings and under Personal Settings, click Keys. Next, we'll click on Generate Auto Key. Give it a name like Ugreen NAS and set an expiration date if you choose to do that. And so then we'll click on Generate Key and copy it to our device's clipboard. Now let's jump back to our Tailscale YAML that we imported. And the first entry under Environments is the Tailscale authorization. And we'll paste the key we just copied where it has the key description. The only other area I would be careful is under volumes. You'll remember that I didn't capitalize the directories that we made, so double check your Docker folder and subdirectories we created to make sure they match the volume path on the left side. The right side is for within the container, so we don't need to worry about that. Beyond that, I did leave some comments in the YAML that we're using, which explain all the other sections if you're at all interested. Next, we'll click on Deploy and allow the project to run. Once it's done, we'll go back to our Tailscale web app, and we should now see our Ugreen NAS as a device within our Tailnet, and it should be listed as connected. To actually connect to it, let's disable Wi-Fi first, and then we'll copy one of the magic DNS addresses from within Tailscale, paste it into a browser window, and we'll need to remember to add a port at the end. So we'll use 9443, and here we are. We can log in with our username and password. Now, if you remember from our last video, we discussed using Tailscale to access our hosted image library that we created. So on my phone, we'll open our Immich app and we'll enter the magic DNS we used before, followed by the Immich port number, which is 2283. And now we have access to our image library remotely and very securely. And that's all this is really about. Security is not about finding one magic setting that protects everything. It's about layering good practices, disabling the ones you don't need, and enabling the security features that are available. And if you need remote access, use something secure like Tailscale or maybe Cloudflare. And let me know in the comments, are you using Cloudflare or Tailscale or something else entirely to access your NAS, and how it's been working for you? Anyway, that's going to wrap up this video. If you found it helpful, please give us a like and make sure that you are subscribed to Mackey Tech. Remember that I will be providing all the links we talked about in my free Patreon, so you can download the YAML that we use for Tailscale. If you want to support me, please consider joining the other tech fans on the channel for access to the member-only videos, or perhaps upgrading your free Patreon to access all of my behind-the-scenes footage. Thank you all to my loyal Patreons who are my supporters. You all know who you are. And thank you all for watching. We'll be talking to you again very soon.